Hi everyone, I'm Yuexin and I'm from Group 18. Today I'm here to give you a quick tour of our front-end design and data visualization for 4 scenarios. First of all, our web application is deployed on the instance. Here we can type this to enter our welcome page. First, let me introduce our 5 members, which is Ziyuan, Xiao, Pengyu, Seehoi, Chow, Yuexin, and Dechao. Below this, we can see that the last data updated time is 25th of May. Actually, our scenario analysis is based on data that has been updated. In other words, the data and diagram are always based on real-time data. We have 3 aims for this project, which is cloud-based solution, data harvesting, and data analysis. Here's a map showing Australia population distribution. In this project, we will focus on 5 greatest capital cities with largest population, which will give us an overall view in Australia. There are 5 steps in this project. First, use Ansible to create instance our Melbourne Research Cloud. Second, use Twitter API to fetch real-time Twitter in Australia, and also collect the data on Orange and other web pages. Third, use CouchDB, MapReduce, and Pandas data frame to do the data analysis. 4. Doing data visualization with Apex chart and JavaScripts. 5. Combine the design and implementation process and all scenarios into a report. Here comes to the scenario 1. The pandemic in Australia is being well controlled. However, it continues to impact many other countries in the world. The primary task recently is to speed up vaccination in Australia. Above all, we want to know people's attention on COVID-19 by searching the amount of coronavirus-related tweets, which is the tweets that include relative topics. Then we can compare people's attention with the real COVID-19 situation in different areas to find out if there's any relation exists. In this part, we mainly use 4 bar charts for data analysis. The first graph is the total number of COVID-19 tweets we received in each region. But because the population of each region is different, we divide the data by 1,000. So the next 2 graphs are the infection rate and vaccination rate of each area we obtained through Orange data. In this scenario, we find that Melbourne, Sydney, and Adelaide have more tweets related to COVID-19, and they are indeed the top 3 capital cities having the highest infection rate. The vaccination complete rate doesn't differ much between each city, but those 3 areas still have a slightly higher rate than others. Maybe citizens in those areas are more willing to use the vaccination to protect themselves, and the government's arrangement is more active. As a result, people's attention to COVID-19 does relate to the real COVID-19 situation. However, we all know that such a high infection in Melbourne is mostly caused by the international flight. So we can now simply conclude that there is any infrastructure problem in the Greater Melbourne. Here we come to scenario 2. It is about people's tweeting behavior in different cities. We wonder, do people prefer to tweet more on weekday or weekend, during daytime or at night? When do people write longer tweets? And is there any city where citizens are always brief when tweeting? Having those questions in mind, we start our investigation on people's tweeting behavior. In this scenario, we focus on the feature created at, which is a posting time for each tweet, and length and word count for text. There are two pie charts. The first is the proportion of number of tweets collected in different greater capital city, and the second is about the population. We find that they have the similar pattern, where more population will tweet more tweets. And here is a line graph about how many tweets do people tweet each weekday in 5 regions. Generally, people in Melbourne and Sydney tweet more. And on Wednesday, we can see that people tend to tweet less. After that, there's an increasing trend occurs, and the peak appears on Saturday, where people always tweet much more than euros. Then is a line chart of how many tweets do people tweet each hour in 5 regions. Since the time shown is Greenwich time, so after converting the time, there's a pattern that people have less time on tweeting in the morning before lunchtime, but tweet more at night, particularly before bedtime, which is around midnight. The third plot is about Twitter average word count on each weekday in 5 regions. As mentioned before, people tweet more on Saturday. However, they tend to tweet shorter tweets on Saturday as well. Among all, Sydney and Melbourne have relatively constant data, and people in Perth are long Twitter lovers. The last plot is about Twitter average words in 24 hours in 5 regions. This plot doesn't have any obvious trend, but it's surprised to see that people usually write longer tweets during the lunch break and after work time. In this scenario, we found the Twitter behavior is strongly influenced by people's daily schedule. When it comes to company hours and school time, people are less active on Twitter, and people tweet more and longer when it's close to or during the break time. Also, in more modern cities like Sydney and Melbourne, people spend more time on tweets. That can be explained by the age composition in different areas, that young people are like to stay in the modern city. Also, they are the mainstream users on social media. An interesting phenomenon is all people like to tweet long tweets at night. At that time, people tend to be more emotional than euros, so they are more likely to express themselves on the internet. Scenario 3 will find the happiest city according to what people text on Twitter. Under this scenario, we are more curious about the content of each tweet and how it can imply people's emotion. We use text-to-emotion package, but the runtime is relatively long, so we randomly select 2,000 samples for each city to represent the overall performance. The mean score of 5 emotions are happy, angry, surprise, sad, and fear. However, we only have 3 plots, which is happy, angry, and sad. Since for the rest 2, the sentiment score are relatively close to each other, and it's hard to make any useful conclusion. First is about sentiment score of happiness. It's obvious to see that Melbourne people are the most happiest residents, while Perth have the lowest happiness scores. Second is about sad. Perth citizens have the greatest sad score, and for the rest four, they didn't differ a lot. Last is the angry. People in Adelaide have the highest angry score, and people in Brisbane have the lowest one. This scenario shows emotion status of people in different regions. It's not difficult to find that people living in Brisbane are less angry and sad and more happy than others. From this, we can infer that people living in Brisbane may live with less pressure. Also, the level of grief among residents in Perth area will be significantly higher than that of other areas. There's little difference in the performance of the relation status in other regions. Next is scenario 4, which is the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. We all know that the COVID-19 affects all walks of life. During 2020, many people start to work at home. And due to the lockdown, plenty of companies are suffering from a hard time. As company layoffs and bankruptcy increase, we want to investigate how the labor market changed before and after the pandemic. So in this section, we will use labor market summary data collected at the end of 2018 and 2020 to make the comparison. We use the line chart here. The first is about change in unemployment rate. We can see that all cities have an increasing in unemployment rate. The second is the change in young unemployment rate. Although the unemployment rate increased, the young employment rate increased as well. However, for Perth, the young employment rate doesn't change at all. And here is a pie chart for vaccination rate. We find that Brisbane vaccination rate is the lowest and the Perth vaccination rate is the highest. So we may infer that people living in Perth are more willing to take the vaccination. The last chart, it shows the relation between 2020 unemployment rate and tweet happiness score in different cities. So we find that although Sydney has a very high unemployment rate change, but people in Sydney always have a high happy score as well. While Perth has the least unemployment rate of change, but it has the lowest happiness score. From the original data, we will know that although the unemployment rate change is small in Perth, but the unemployment rate in Perth is always very high and is higher than other areas. So in this section, the pandemic affects the unemployment rate in some extent, but it's not the only cases. Although the COVID-19 situation is more serious in Victoria State, Greater Sydney has the largest unemployment rate change before and after the pandemic. It also gained a low score in sentiment analysis of happiness. The employment rate for young people increased at the end of 2020, as the overall unemployment rate increased. Perth is the least happy city among all. Though it has the lowest unemployment rate change, the original unemployment rate is higher than most of the city, so the pandemic didn't affect the unemployment rate much. But the government needs to further study the long-term labor market to decrease the unemployment rate in Perth, and then we may expect an improvement in happiness score as well. And this is the end of this tour.